In late August of 1955, as night descended on the city of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, a large family entered the local police station, explaining that they'd been engaged in a harrowing shootout at their farmhouse. But they weren't shooting at other people. They reported, quite vehemently, that they had been shooting at small, goblin-like entities thought to be aliens. Aliens who were terrorizing the farm. Fast forward over 20 years, and Steven Spielberg was working on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when his primary source of UFO knowledge, J. Allen Hynek, told him the story of the alien siege on a Kentucky farm. Spielberg loved it, and when Columbia Pictures was looking to make a sequel for Close Encounters, he had his inspiration. He wrote a movie treatment based on the Hopkinsville encounter called Watch the Skies, and since Spielberg was under contract with another studio at the time, he approached horror icon Tobe Hooper to direct. Hooper passed on the project, suggesting an alternate version where, instead of mean-spirited aliens attacking a family farm, malicious ghosts would attack a suburban neighborhood. Watch the Skies would eventually morph into the far more family-friendly E.T., but Spielberg was still interested in Hooper's idea. Thus, Poltergeist was born.
Cuesta Verde is an idyllic community in sunny California, and it is here that real estate agent Steve Freeling lives with his wife and 3 children. However, their idealized existence is upended by strange occurrences that culminate in the inexplicable disappearance of their youngest, Carol Ann. Knowing that the police will not understand their supernatural predicament, they turn to parapsychologists and mediums to help them battle the malevolent beast that now haunts their home.
Before we go any further, if you could please hit that like button, we might be able to save this channel from the mindless anger of the YouTube algorithm. If you really do like this video, please subscribe as well. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. After writing his own story treatment for the project and briefly trying to work out a deal with none other than Stephen King, Steven Spielberg approached the screenwriters Mark Victor and Michael Grais to turn it into a full script. Unfortunately, since he was contractually forbidden to direct another film while working on E.T., Spielberg couldn't direct the film himself, so he and co-producer Frank Marshall gave the director's chair to Tobe Hooper, the man who had come up with the idea in the first place. Hooper was of course known for directing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but he'd also just finished the cult classic slasher film, The Funhouse. Let's not avoid the elephant in the room here. Rumors have circulated for decades that, though Tobe Hooper was given the screen credit and sat in the director's chair, Poltergeist was actually directed by Steven Spielberg, who was trying to use a technical loophole to fulfill his contractual obligations. Reports from the cast and crew were mixed, and there is plenty of evidence to both support and refute this rumor. My impression, after looking into the question for far too long, is that Tobe Hooper was, in fact, the director, but that he was soft-spoken, taking a more hands-off approach. Spielberg was certainly on set from time to time, and his fingerprints are absolutely on the final film, but he wasn't the director. He helped with handling the child actors, that was his specialty after all. He oversaw most of the post-production, and he did relay a lot of the filmmaking decisions to the cast and crew during filming, more loudly and forcefully than Hooper ever did. However, Poltergeist is still Hooper's movie, and you can see his fingerprints too, if you know what they look like. It's just that Spielberg's are a bit more flashy and familiar. The Directors Guild of America ran an exhaustive investigation into the matter, as they take the directing credit very seriously. And they came to the same basic conclusion: Spielberg did not direct Poltergeist. They also fined MGM for featuring Spielberg's name more prominently than Hooper's in the promotional materials, which probably provided more grist for the rumor mill. Spielberg was an exceptionally hands-on producer, to be sure, but according to the Guild, he never overstepped his role. You are, of course, allowed to come to your own opinion, which you are free to tell me about in the comments, but at this point, I'm content to accept the DGA's conclusion. Spielberg and Hooper wanted to cast the film with lesser-known talent to heighten the realism. For the patriarch of the family, Stephen, they chose Craig T. Nelson, only known at the time for films like Private Benjamin, Where the Buffalo Roam, and Stir Crazy, but who would later achieve great success in the long-running sitcom Coach. For his wife, Diane, they cast Jo Beth Williams, who had also been in Stir Crazy, along with having a memorable nude scene in Kramer vs. Kramer.
Do you like fried chicken?
Fried chicken very much. It's been nice seeing you, and
Bye.
Bye.
Perhaps the best-known actor in the film at the time was the classically trained Beatrice Straight, who won an Academy Award for her role in 1976's Network. For Poltergeist, she plays Dr. Lesh, a psychologist who dabbles in parapsychology as a hobby. She might low-key be the most interesting character for me, and her whispered speech to Robbie about the afterlife has always felt creepy, hypnotic, and reassuring, all at the same time.
There's a wonderful light, as bright as the sun, but it doesn't hurt to look into it.
Of course, Dr. Lesh is surpassed by the unforgettable ghost expert Tangina, as played by Zelda Rubinstein. Even though she'd never had an acting credit to her name, Rubinstein fought hard for the part, as she believed herself to be a psychic and clairvoyant and could do the part justice. Later in life, she would become an advocate for AIDS patients and short-statured people. However, she absolutely hated Tobe Hooper, and never hid that fact from interviewers, accusing him of illicit drug use on set and a whole lot of other things. She may be the single most responsible person for spreading the rumor that Hooper didn't direct Poltergeist, even though she only worked on the film for 6 days, and it isn't too much of a stretch to say that she is at least partially responsible for damaging the man's career. The Freelings' teenage daughter Dana was played by the rising star Dominique Dunne, who was actually 22 at the time of filming. Now, I want to point out that the movie's novelization makes it clear that Dana is Steve's daughter from another relationship, which is nice, since by the movie's math, Diane was 16 when Dana was born. Poltergeist had the potential to greatly increase the actress's profile, but in November of 1982, while working on the miniseries V, Dunne was strangled to death by her former boyfriend. The youngest daughter, Carol Ann, who in early drafts of the script actually died in the first act, proved to be especially difficult to cast. Spielberg brought in Drew Barrymore to audition, but thought she was a poor fit for the material, though she was impressive enough that he would instead cast her in E.T. Separately, Spielberg noticed Heather O'Rourke eating lunch with her family at the MGM commissary and brought her in to audition as well. At first, O'Rourke couldn't stop laughing during scenes, but after a couple of different auditions, she was eventually chosen. In 1988, O'Rourke died suddenly from undiagnosed congenital stenosis of the intestine while filming Poltergeist 3, which, alongside Dominic Dunne's violent death, helped fuel the long-standing urban legend of the Poltergeist curse, something you may explore in your own time. Filming began in May of 1981 in Simi Valley, California, where most of the exteriors were filmed, including the outside of the house, a real 2-story suburban home that still stands today, though the current owners don't appreciate gawkers, and trees have obscured most of the view from the street. The neighborhood shots, though, were done in Agora Hills, while the vast majority of the interiors and the backyard were filmed on MGM soundstages back in Culver City. The climactic pool scene became infamous for the alleged use of real skeletons, as they were easier and cheaper to acquire than fake ones. As far as I can tell, this is one poltergeist rumor that is 100% true, and Jo Beth Williams was indeed terrified during filming. However, it wasn't because of the skeletons, which she didn't learn were real until later. No, she was actually afraid that the stage lights would fall into the water with her and electrocute her, prompting Spielberg to get in the pool with her to prove it was safe. Safety was also an issue for the actor who plays Robbie, Oliver Robbins, who nearly suffocated when the clown puppet choked him a little too hard, and the crew thought his obvious panic was merely good acting. Robbins was rescued in time, of course, and as of this recording, he is still alive and well, apparently unaffected by the curse. When principal photography was complete, Tobe Hooper oversaw the primary edit of the film, and once Spielberg was finished shooting E.T., he came in to assist, while also working closely with the visual and special effects teams at ILM. There were some behind-the-scenes battles with the MPAA who wanted to give the film an R rating, but Spielberg ultimately prevailed in granting it a more box-office-friendly PG by using, and I'm not kidding here, the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the guy's face melts off. 5 months before production had even begun, Spielberg brought in Jerry Goldsmith, who he had long admired, to do the score. Goldsmith worked closely with Spielberg to set the tone, and the final result is haunting in all the right ways. Fun fact, the music box-style Carol Ann's theme actually has lyrics. Poltergeist opened on June 4th, 1982, just 1 week prior to E.T., and brought in a hefty $76.6 million domestic box office gross against a $10.7 million budget, making it the highest-earning horror film of the year. It was a critical hit as well, cementing its legacy for decades to come. It had 2 sequels, a very loosely connected television series, and a 2015 remake so mediocre, even Sam Rockwell and Jared Harris don't make it memorable. While we're stopped, let me just take a minute to thank my patrons. Their support really makes this channel possible, so please, if you like these videos, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, vote on future topics, and more. You can also give me a one-time contribution by clicking on the thanks button below. Also, if you want even more content from me, I'm the co-host of a couple of different podcasts, The Streaming Heap and From Here to Paternity, which are available wherever you get your podcasts, and I have a novel called Paradox that is available through Amazon. If all else fails, though, you can always check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Now then, with all that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's move on. Now as for me, I grew up with Poltergeist. It was my first horror movie and will always hold a special place in my heart. Watching it as an adult, I fully expected to see some flaws, but honestly, I think it still holds up today. It is definitely a product of the early 80s, but that theme of something dark and twisted just beneath the surface of the stereotypical American suburban life is no less relevant today. It also separates itself from a lot of modern ghost stories by not getting hung up on skepticism. In real life, I do consider myself a skeptic, but when I watch a horror movie involving ghosts, I don't want to waste too much time with people questioning the reality of what we all know is happening in the fictional world in front of us. This movie sidesteps that problem and actually shows people being broken down psychologically from what is happening to them, not because they doubt that ghosts are involved, but simply because they don't know how to process or react to it. This becomes especially true after Carol Ann's disappearance, when the household is little more than shattered remnants of itself, acting more out of trauma than rationality. But of course, Poltergeist is really a damning portrayal of civilization, particularly American civilization, where one nuclear family was literally built on top of the misery and suffering of others. Rather than having skeletons in the closet, the Freelings have an entire graveyard beneath their feet, and the dead lash out at their happiness with vengeance and despair, bitterly drawn to the innocence of youth, of which they feel more deserving than the other living souls within the house. It is this theme in particular, and how it is highlighted in both subtle and obvious ways with snarky jabs at rampant consumerism, Reaganomics, and corporate negligence, that leads me to conclude that this really is a Tobe Hooper film, even if it feels more like a Spielberg one. Spielberg did tackle some similar themes in Close Encounters, but never with the same edge. For example, Where Spielberg would certainly put Star Wars products in his film to nod at his friend George Lucas,
And this is Lando Calrissian. See? And this is Boba Fett.
Hooper uses a horde of merchandise to reflect the hollow opulence of Americana, where wealth is wasted on corporate licensed trinkets while very real horrors are buried out of sight and mind. This kind of biting social commentary feels far more like the socio-political nightmare of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is all about the grisly details of how the sausage is made, than it does the divorce trauma Spielberg explores in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. When all is said and done, though, it doesn't really matter who you choose to believe is most responsible for Poltergeist. For what it's worth, I went into this review assuming it was Spielberg, but now my opinion has swung completely in the opposite direction. Regardless, Poltergeist will always remain a fascinating and entertaining film that continues to influence an entire genre today. It is, without a doubt, a horror classic. And that's all for today, my fellow mortals. What's your favorite haunted house movie? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll finally cover my most requested sequel, this is the Unapologetic Geek telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.